Hi, and welcome to Newsmakers for inside analysis and behind-the-scenes commentary from Santa Barbara's top journalists and political leaders about the most important news events in our community. I'm your host, Jerry Roberts. Tonight, we look behind these headlines. Goleta's City Council votes to get those damn dumb scooters off their streets and sidewalks. Survivors remember the horror as the first anniversary of the Thomas Fire and the Montecito disaster approaches. Innovative community strategies emerge to respond to the new normal of climate change calamities. And then we'll take a look back at the biggest stories of 2018. Our panel tonight, Josh Molina, who covers politics and policy for Newshawk. Kathryn Barnes, news producer at KCRW-FM. Laura Capps, nonprofit consultant and school board member. Thank you all for coming. So Josh, Goleta was the latest city to be hit by the national plague of motorized scooters dumped throughout the town by tech bro disruptors. And the council did not take kindly to it. What happened?
Well, the council, after it was about a 3-hour meeting, they said, we're done. We're banning these from the city of Goleta. And they said, hey, we're open to you coming back, working with us to have a plan for scooters. But what happened was Bike First in September dropped several hundred. They, at the meeting, said they didn't really know how many. Lime followed. And the scooters are great. I mean, the technology is cool. It's an opportunity for people to use them, last mile sort of stuff. But the problem was they didn't really know their community. They dropped 400, that's sort of the number people are using, in a residential neighborhood. And we're talking 5, 6 on every corner. Too many. And they weren't stacked properly. They were laying, they were blocking the sidewalk. Roger Aceves, who's been on the council 12 years, said he's never had more public outrage and comment over an issue like this one. This was the most that he's ever seen. 300 people sent emails to the city council saying, mostly, get rid of these things. There are some supporters of it as well. They are cool, but they just don't know the market.
Well, but it's not just Goleta. I mean, first of all, it was earlier in Santa Barbara that had a similar experience, but it's in New York. It's all across the country. Santa Monica, yeah.
I mean, that's what's stunning to me about what happened is that these companies have money and that they didn't sort of invest on the front end to figure out how to do this correctly with government relations and working with cities. Because I mean, it sounds as though there could have been some compromise, but they just go in and dump them. It's crazy.
Well, Santa Barbara, they tried this in Santa Barbara earlier in the year.
Yeah.
200 on State Street. Santa Barbara swooped in, impounded them within the day, and Goleta let them stay for 2.5 months. They made a lot of money in those 2.5 months. A lot of high school students were using them to get to school.
But you're supposed to be 18 to drive one, right?
Supposed to be 18.
Supposed to have a helmet.
And you're supposed to upload your driver's license. You're supposed to, it's a motorized vehicle. You have to have a driver's license to do this. So parents were logging their kids in, using their app so they could use them. So the problem was there's just so much clutter. If you were in Goleta, you could not go anywhere without seeing these bikes on Old Town, Kyriel, Stork, on people's private property. They have to figure out a way to make these work in a way where the community accepts them. They're dockless, so people say, well, in order for scooters to be effective, they need to be everywhere you go. You can't have them in some shopping center where Kmart used to be because people will have to go there, and that's not convenient. So they're just going to figure out a way. They'll probably be back, but I don't think we're ever going to see 4, 5, 6 on a street corner. The county is regulating them. They're taking a different approach. They're going to charge them for using the public right-of-way, a fee per vehicle, per square footage that they are taking up. So if you just, a stone's throw from Goleta, if you go over to El Colegio in front of Isla Vista toward UCSB, there's hundreds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Are they allowed on campus at UCSB?
UCSB has banned them because the UCSB medical director said we're seeing a lot more injuries.
Yeah.
People don't know how to use them. There's been one accident that has been documented in the city of Goleta And the other big thing is people say, oh, these are environmental friendly and we need to get people out of our cars and all these things. Well, there is actually an environmental push against them. People saying, these don't get people out of cars, these get people away from walking and bicycling. So this is not healthy. People are using this instead of using their bodies to be healthier. And these are big companies. These are, Uber's in talks to buy Bird.
Yeah.
This isn't the small little startup that we want to help. So that's all part of the debate and the conversation. They've only been around 8 months in existence. They're going to be growing pains. Eventually, they're going to be here.
Kathryn, this show has spent more than $65 million in market research to discover, that we really need to reach out to the millennial cohort. Now, speaking on behalf of your tens of millions of colleagues, I mean, do you think this is kind of a good idea to bring them in?
I like them. Truthfully, I've never used one because I'm kind of terrified. I'm not a good biker, and I would never go on anything without a helmet because I don't trust myself. So because I never have a helmet with me, I've never actually gone on one of these scooters. But I've seen them in the Bay Area and Santa Monica, and I do think they're pretty cool. I mean, people are going fairly long distances, a few miles to get to work from the train station or from the bus. And I don't know, it's like this interesting cultural phenomenon of maybe if they're around long enough, people will learn how to respect the space a little bit better. Because I think what I noticed when they all dumped them into different cities, people were just, they were strewn across sidewalks and getting in people's way. And it's a hindrance for people in wheelchairs or people who have babies in strollers. Like if they can't use these wheelchair accessible ramps because there's a huge scooter in the way, that's, a problem for the whole society.
Of course, it was the same business model as Uber used, which is just crash
Right, it's sort of like,
city.
the notion of, better to apologize, forgiveness than to ask for permission. And I was a little slow there off the take, but you understand what I meant.
But
it's sort of
a mansplain.
of course. So I'm just sort of surprised that just from a company perspective, why they just come in and dump them without sort of checking and working the systems. It doesn't, from reading your story, it doesn't seem like any of that happened.
No, I think the theory is, I read this on Slate, okay, I didn't make this up, but it's basically because existing transportation systems, whether it's cabs or public transportation or trains or whatever, is so built into the fabric of cities that it's impossible to sort of chip away at that and find some way into the market. You have to do something dramatic and parachute in and change people's behavior from the front end. I don't know.
Well, the thing is that Goleta is the good land, and it's a community that
Really?
cannot handle that high number of scooters.
Too stressful, huh?
Well, it's just not appropriate. There's not the population for that, and there are far more families and children and people in strollers who are using the public right-of-way, and these scooters are blocking them. So I think because it's so close to UCSB, just like everything, UCSB is such an impact, Isla Vista is such an impact, it is spilling over. But these companies need to do their market research and know if we're going to drop them in the Bay Area or San Diego, it's very different than the
They had big problems. in San
single-family
Francisco,
homes in Goleta.
too. They collected them. All right, Kathryn, you've been doing interviews with Montecito residents affected by the Thomas Fire and the debris flow. What are you hearing? What are they telling you? What's the state of mind?
Yeah, so last year, we spoke with a lot of people whose houses burned down in the fire, and then also survivors of the mudslide. And this year, we kind of wanted to return back to a few of those people and hear how they're doing 1 year later and what their life is like now. Not only because we were just curious and thought other people would be too, but a lot of these disasters are continuing on. There's the Woolsey fire and the Camp Fire, so there's this isn't going anywhere, and I think it would be interesting for people to learn from one another about the rebuilding process and how long things take and all that. So one guy we talked to down in Ventura, his house was destroyed in the Thomas Fire. he toured the property with us, and he hasn't started rebuilding. Only a handful of people. There were over 1,000 homes were destroyed in the Thomas fire. Only a handful have actually started rebuilding, and so his property, everything has been cleared, but he's still waiting for his insurance money and, most importantly, permits from the city of Ventura to start building. So he's still in an apartment with his family, kind of waiting for this, which I found surprising that within a year there's only a few people who are actually breaking ground and starting construction.
And are the interviews online now?
They're going to be tomorrow. Yeah, and we're collaborating with the Independent, so they'll also be in print in the Independent on Thursday. Yeah, and another person we spoke with was Mari Mitchell, and she's a survivor of the mudslide. Lived in Montecito with her husband, and so she kind of recounts what happened to them that morning. 3 a.m. in the morning, she heard the explosion and woke up, looked out the window, quickly woke up her husband who was asleep, and then she said at that exact moment was when the garage from across the street had dislodged and rammed into their wall. Mud started coming in, and then they were trapped in their house for a few hours before they were saved. And since then, they have moved. They moved to Hope Ranch. They luckily have money and have resources and were able to move. But her husband told her a few days after, "We will never live here again."
Yeah. I'm curious, the project to put hairnets on the mountains.
The partnership.
Yes, the partnership.
Hairnets.
To prevent this from happening again. What's the CEC's position on that? Is that more of a...
Yeah, no, I don't think that the Community Environmental Council is a climate organization, and so we're certainly focused on the fact that these climate-related events are continuing to happen right in front of our eyes and ways to mitigate against that. There are some environmentalists, I've read that some environmentalists are objecting to the nets, but as far as I understand, it's more like individuals, but certainly not the Community Environmental Council.
So you don't see it like a big environmental issue?
It's a wildlife.
Yeah, there's some wildlife. And I'm not. But it's just what I've read in I guess it'd be Keith's reporting in the Independent, that there's some individuals that are objecting, and they might be associated with like a creeks group to some degree, but it's not the major environmental groups here. EDC and Community Environmental Council certainly aren't objecting.
I have a question for Kathryn. On this investigative, extensive piece, why are you collaborating with the Independent? Now, did you put this out to bid, all the media? And
We
partners?
have a relationship and have collaborated in the past on events, so we thought it'd
Doing
be...
things the old way. Okay, got it.
The Independent is actually interesting, Josh.
We're looking at it.
Well,
we can already put ours on the web. We can't put ours
I'm
in
the
print.
I see. I'm the lone wolf. I forgot you were also an independent
How
collaborator.
many times have you been on their show over there? How many?
KCRW?
Yeah.
Several.
Several
A
times.
number.
Yeah, not anymore apparently.
More.
No. Yes.
All right. So building on
Yeah.
Kathryn's story, you have a big piece on climate change and new disaster planning, which Senator Feinstein put on her Twitter feed. Not that I'm bitter about it.
You got a little jealous.
I didn't know that.
But
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
she got like major pickup on. How much pickup do you get?
It was retweeted a few hundred times, like 400 times. A lot of haters, a lot of trolls.
Really?
Yeah. Well, anti-climate
Twitter.
people. Yeah.
So what's the thrust of the piece?
Anyway, so I looked at a year later of Thomas Fire, sort of the new normal, which is these climate extremes. At the time, obviously, as we all know, it was the biggest fire in California's history, but now it's not. And that this is just, all the data shows that what we're experiencing here in our backyard is now aligning with global trends. There's triple the number of these extreme weather events that cause mass destruction and death around the country than there was in 1980. So this is the deal, and communities like ours have to prepare. Unfortunately, a lot of things went into preparation 10 years ago. The Orfalea Foundation funded this emergency operations center and got people to work together and formed these sort of coalitions of communication. Because when it comes down to it, it's really all about trust. It sounds simple, but if folks know each other ahead of time, in in the moments where you have to make split decisions and you already have a relationship between fire and police, between those actual individuals, they're just much more apt to make a good decision and much more quickly.
I have to say that I haven't seen so many acronyms in a story since Kelsey left us earlier.
It's
earlier
acronym
this year.
heavy. I'm going to save the acronyms, but yeah, there's a lot of.
What is
it's
VOAD?
VOAD.
VOAD. Sorry.
VOAD. I can't even spell it
okay.
out for you, but
It's
it's volunteer is the beginning.
No, but my point is that, going back to this sort of synergistic
Exactly. Like
interrelated-
even here's
there's
one for you.
different stages,
So here's
right?
one for you that this is how how nitty gritty it's getting. There's a group called EPIC, which is the information officers for each of the entities, so that they all coordinate so that statements that go out to the public when we're in this panic mode are aligned. Because you can imagine if county is saying something different than city, or schools are saying, oh, you can't, so they actually get together on a regular basis. I actually saw on Facebook that they just had like a holiday party, this group of information officers. So that's one thing that Orfla put in motion, along with support from the county about a decade ago.
And then you had the piece about the cell phones and the abysmal failure of cell phone companies to join in the communitarian effort.
Yeah, I think that's a difficulty, is when things do go wrong. I mean, there's the Aware and Prepare, so people sign up to get alerts. Those come to their phones. There's also the WIA, the Wireless Emergency Alert, which is a federal alert system that is supposed to kind of be the catch-all. If danger is coming, you will get this alert. But as we saw during the mudslide, a lot of people didn't get that. And also during the holiday fire in Goleta, there were reports that people weren't getting the messages they needed. So I think an issue is when there is an issue, how do you communicate with the cell phone companies to figure out where that disconnect happened? And that's what county officials are trying to figure out.
So when you did your reporting about the cooperation and collaboration, cell phone companies are not part of that. They're not really helping.
Not that that was part of my research, no.
No, but okay.
I think
All right.
Rob Lewin has requested information and hasn't gotten much back.
Yeah.
Now, Laura, why didn't you choose to publish your piece in Newsmakers?
Or Newshawk.
Give him the exclusive.
Yeah.
We don't have
Yeah,
a
that would've-
partnership, so that wouldn't.
No, that
Well, I will say, like you, my online piece was quite long. It was a lengthy one, a la Jerry
What do you
Roberts.
mean, like me? What is that supposed to? What is that supposed to?
I don't know how much you
I
could write
There's
more
no appreciation for thorough
about the
reporting
school
anymore.
board. It's
I
like
thought your what about?
there's a lot.
You going to start now?
You've been putting a lot of words about the school board out there.
Well,
They-
Josh and I agree. As,
The length of your stories match the length of our meetings in some correlation.
well, there's been a tremendous lack of accountability over there, and I think Josh here will agree with me.
We saw it Tuesday night.
Now you're on the case.
All right, getting back to climate change. And by the way, I thought that was a well-edited piece.
It
too.
was well-edited,
Yeah, thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
There seems to be, like, just in the last couple of weeks, this sudden new urgency on everybody but Trump's part about climate change. I mean, you had you have the meeting that's going on in Poland. There's a new UN study.
Well,
Trump's own administration
Right.
put out a study, and now we read that the Arctic is going to finish melting next week or
Yes.
something.
Yes.
Is there a change? Because it's always been the kind of issue that's, that's a terrible thing. It's out there and so on. Do you
Well, the
sense that?
science just continues. I mean, I think we've started tracking this within the last few decades, and so just more and more of these studies and scientific reports are coming out. It's just the longevity of the issue that we've been now focused on, and the consensus behind it. But yeah, it's very alarming. I mean, for the president to dispute his own report, that just happened last week as well, and that yet here we have California on fire. It's just remarkable.
Based on the fact that he doesn't believe it, which
Right.
is, that's pretty scientific. All right, well, let's talk about the year in review a little bit. Obviously, the biggest story of the year was
School board?
School board, Jerry.
the disaster in Montecito. I don't know what's wrong with you people. Josh, what was the biggest story on the political beat?
Well, first of all,
Oscar's election, you think?
we have the debris flow, and that's That's
No, that's
got
what I'm-
many threads,
that's-
and
that's what I'm-
that's
yeah.
like 1 through 10. So everything after that. We have Oscar Gutierrez. We have 3 Mexican Americans on the Santa Barbara City Council, which is a record. First time, and so it shows that to some degree district elections is working. The health of State Street. We have Amazon talking about coming downtown for offices, but also doing a retail component, which would certainly change the whole feel of downtown.
That was one of your scoops, wasn't it,
Scoop?
Josh?
One of my scoops. No one from radio
So was that
asked
the
me
question?
to speak about that story.
It's because they had Laura on, because they heard she had Feinstein's Twitter feed. That's why.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right.
It's a little light on specifics.
Yes. Well, sometimes you just go with what you know.
I haven't heard much about that story lately.
Yeah, because I haven't reported it.
Yeah,
and No
okay.
one else
Anyway,
has the
what else?
sources
What
to
else?
do it. Yes. Target coming to Goleta
Oh yeah,
is going
maybe
to be a
Starshine's favorite story.
big deal.
of all
No, I mean
time.
it's going to be huge for the city of Goleta. Santa Barbara lost out big time there. They have this little retail store or this smaller sales store where you go and you pick things up, you pre-order. That's been delayed, but now we have the real Target, so that's going to be sort of interesting. The health of State Street downtown, that's been an ongoing issue. We have
the
obviously
continued
many-
heavy hand oppression of City Hall against people who want to do something on State Street as well.
That's what some in the business community would say, for sure. City Hall would say it's the greedy property owners who don't want to lower their rent.
But-
I think you asked them for one thing, right? Or
Well, yeah,
what's
you know.
going on
And,
here?
and I got minimum 20
Okay.
20-minute commitment from Jerry if I'm going to show up here.
No, that's on her show that you get to do that.
Oh, the rise of the pop-ups on State Street is really interesting. We've seen a lot of them. Is this going to work? It's an
Empanadas.
experiment, and we have that thing going on with Macy's. So
Yeah,
State Street
Macy's, Sears, yeah, that's all going real well.
inside the Macy's building. You should check it out. They have very good food there.
I don't cook that. What about environmentally? What was the
All
big
right,
stories?
I'm gonna choose.
I mean, again,
I'm
you
gonna
know,
choose this one. It wasn't a super exciting story, but 3 years ago, the biggest
No, we were talking about
biggest
last
story.
year.
I
yeah,
know,
this year.
I'm getting
Okay.
there. Okay, so 3 years ago, we had this oil spill that was pretty disastrous.
Plains
was that
oil
3 years ago? 2015, May of 2015.
Refugio. As
Good.
Melinda
All
You're
this
like a
oil
local.
dumped in the ocean. It was no good. It was a corroded pipeline, and so this year was the trial for Plains All American against the county of Santa Barbara and the state of California. Brought charges against Plains All American Pipeline Company.
as well as Barry Capello, but that's a separate suit.
They were found guilty. The company was found guilty on, I think, just about a dozen charges, nearly a dozen charges. And they're supposed to be sentencing them by the end of this year.
But nobody's going to jail.
Nobody's going to jail. They'll probably just be fined, largely.
And what about the rapacious policies on our public lands?
Wow.
See how I did that?
Yeah, I think, as fires continue, I think the ongoing debate will be, whether or not to log, whether or not to thin forests. There's a lot of debates against environmentalists and conservationists, but then people who say, these fires are getting so big because there's so much fuel and we should be thinning our forests. They shouldn't be this vegetated. So I think that'll be kind of the story of next year.
All right. And what about local stories that sort of resonated
Beyond,
nationally? Or,
beyond Thomas Fire, though, that's the question.
Yeah,
correct?
yeah,
because
it's all
certainly
beyond.
it's hard to think of it without that. Resistance, and I would kind of make a hybrid answer. Because
Josh, yeah, he had multiple.
I'm going to keep mine to two, but they're related. You can time me.
This has been the most passive-aggressive show we've ever
I
done.
don't know, last week was
So the school board race, but I connected, which I think was the most interesting political race this season. But I connected
Who do
to
you think had the best coverage?
I connected to the resistance, the fact that we do have a really active voter base here. Our turnout was astounding. People are volunteering. People are marching. There's a rally about ICE. There's so many different issues. I feel like people in this community are really I think they have a tradition of being really active, but it's at a fever pitch right now. And, you know, like I mentioned on a recent show, volunteering in spades for Katie Hill, who won just barely for Congress down south of us. And I connect that to how many people ran for the school board, 8 people running for 2 spots. And so that, you know, is hopeful to me. It's a hopeful story.
Yeah. Do you think that the San Marcos High School situation had anything to do with all those people?
I do
running?
think it was part of it, and I do think that was a big story as well.
It was a big story.
Yeah.
The San Marcos thing
Yeah, absolutely.
took up millions of column inches over at Newsmakers. All right, well, this is our last show of 2018, and as we enter the holiday season, our tradition here at Newsmakers, of course, is to hand out our presents, and
Nice.
I have the
Wow.
proper hat for doing that. First of all, for
It's a
you,
good look for you.
thank you. I appreciate it. For you, Kathryn, I've put there's some radio antennas on top of the
I've always
candy
wanted
canes,
these.
so you can
This will look
listen
good on my dog too.
KCRW
Nice.
all of the time. You don't have to worry about anything else. Josh, I used to have something in here for you.
Oh, that's
I
fine.
don't know.
I'll pass.
Oh,
It's okay.
Oh,
JP,
Wait a second.
I got you the finest beer at CVS. We'll hang on to that right now
I'm
for you. Let's
not
see.
cold.
I think you're promoting an unhealthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
Jerry.
Well, speaking of unhealthy lifestyles, Josh, you sit in more public meetings than anyone, so I got you a 6-pack of 5-hour energy.
I know, he
so you
stays
can,
to the end of these
He
meetings.
does.
I'm
He
This
glad.
is what I
does.
need to deal with Anna Marie Gott right here. I need
Okay.
more energy to keep up with her.
And Laura, this is a
Yay.
Norwegian pine that I thought
I'm so
Hey, it goes with
excited.
your
would look
Sure, I love it.
look very nice. And
These
let's
gifts are
see.
not sexist at all.
No, wait. No, to our high-powered senior
I'm keeping the
executive
beer.
producer, Hap Freund, as ever, the elf hat. And Hap, that'll look good on your,
Thank you.
whatever that thing on top of your head is there.
This one fits much
Oh,
better
looks
than
good
the
on
old
you.
one.
Oh, I
Oh,
love
yeah,
the
that's-
ears.
that's
are
a good
perfect.
look.
Yeah.
That's a really good look. And Nick is not with us, but for the 14th year in a row, he lost the best columnist column, but he did win the Best Body Award. So we'll have that for Nick next time. So thank you all for watching, and thanks to our guests, Josh Molina, Kathryn Barnes, and Laura Capps. Please visit our website, newsmakerswithjr.com, to check out my blog posts on politics and media in Santa Barbara and beyond, and our YouTube channel, where you'll find an archive of past shows and interviews, should your insomnia be particularly troublesome. Thanks again to our director, JP Montalvo, to Tristan, Kyle, and Tara, and as always, to Hap Freund. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in the new year.